courtroom is bathed in a strange, heavy silence. The thick wooden doors creaked open slowly, their echo stretching through the grand hall like a whisper from the past. A tiny figure stepped inside, just 5 years old. Her name was Charlotte Bennett. Her small hand clutched tightly to the leash of a large gray dog named Zeus. Every eye turned. Charlotte walked slowly. Her little red shoes tapped softly against the wooden floor, each step like a heartbeat in a room full of held breaths. She didn't speak, didn't smile. She didn't even look scared. She just kept walking toward the witness stand, the place she had never dared to go before. Zeus stayed glued to her side. Every lick to her trembling hand, every gentle nudge against her knee was like him saying, "You've got this, little one." Then it happened. Charlotte gave a tiny hand signal, so subtle it might have gone unnoticed, but not by Zeus. The dog's body went rigid, his ears perked, his golden eyes locked on someone in the room. And then a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. But it changed everything. The judge froze. The room held its breath. And Charlotte, for the first time in months, opened her mouth to speak. What did the dog just sense? What was the little girl trying to say without words? Could animal instinct shatter a wall of silence? Welcome to DG Story, where stories touch the heart and stir the soul. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Give us a like and subscribe so you never miss a tale like this. The courtroom was hushed, almost reverent, as the heavy oak doors creaked open. All eyes turned to the entrance, where a tiny figure stood motionless for a breath. Charlotte Bennett, just 5 years old, stepped into the room with hesitant grace. In her hand, she held a thick, dark leash. At the other end was Zeus, a large German shepherd with a jagged scar running down his side, like a lightning bolt etched into his fur. Together they walked the long aisle like an unlikely pair of warriors entering a battlefield. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the spectators section. Some leaned forward. Others clutched their notepads tighter. Even the jurors turned slightly in their chairs. This wasn't just a witness entering, this was a moment none of them would forget. Charlotte's dress, a soft cream with pale yellow flowers, brushed gently against her legs as she walked. She moved slowly, not out of fear, but with a fragile kind of determination that made hearts ache. Her brown curls bounced slightly with every step, but her expression never changed. She was quiet but not lost, scared but not broken. Zeus walked beside her with silent power, his ears alert, his stride steady. Though aged and scarred, he carried himself with the bearing of a retired soldier. No one needed to be told he wasn't an ordinary dog. His eyes scanned the room, protective, almost calculating. When Charlotte reached the witness stand, she paused. The bailiff stepped forward to help, but she gently shook her head and climbed up herself, clutching the leash even tighter. Judge Nathan Holloway, a man with nearly 3 decades on the bench, leaned forward slightly. His salt and pepper eyebrows furrowed, and his pale blue eyes watched the girl intently. This case had consumed the entire state. It was the kind of case that made headlines, that parents whispered about at bedtime, that lawmakers used to push bills. And now, the only person who might break it open was 5 years old and hadn't said a single word since the day it happened. Holloway had seen hardened criminals and sobbing mothers. He'd watched liars with polished smiles and innocent men with shattered eyes. But he'd never seen a child like this, so silent, yet so commanding. He glanced at the defendant's table. Daniel Ross sat still, arms folded, a faint smirk playing at the edge of his mouth. A middle-aged software consultant with glasses and thinning hair, he looked like the kind of man you'd ignore at a coffee shop. That's what made him dangerous. And today, Charlotte Bennett was his only accuser. The judge's gavel hadn't even dropped for the official opening, and yet the air was already thick with something powerful, something unsaid. Holloway felt it crawl up his spine. Something was about to happen. Charlotte sat on the tall wooden witness chair, her tiny legs dangling above the ground. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, the knuckles white from pressure. Zeus sat beside her on the floor, like a silent guardian carved out of stone. His eyes scanned the room not lazily, but deliberately, as if reading something deeper in the air. Tension buzzed quietly beneath the courtroom's polished surface. Across the room, Daniel Ross sat still behind the defense table. He looked relaxed. His fingers tapped softly against the wood in a slow, smug rhythm. His lawyer, Michael Greer, whispered something in his ear, but Daniel didn't respond. His eyes were locked on Charlotte. This was the strategy. Discredit the child. No voice, no statement, no evidence, just a traumatized little girl. To him, it was already won. And then it happened. Charlotte's green eyes flicked up briefly and locked with Daniel's. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to pause. Then, ever so slightly, her fingers twitched. Not a flinch, not a nervous tick. A signal. A silent code. Zeus felt it before anyone else. His body stiffened, like a coil pulled tight. His ears snapped forward. A low rumble began to rise from his throat, deep, warning, ancient. His eyes fixed on Daniel Ross with frightening intensity. There was no doubt. It was recognition, not obedience, not training. This was primal. People began to shift in their seats. A murmur spread like static. Something about the dog's growl, so focused, so unwavering, sent a chill through the room. This wasn't a comfort dog reacting to stress. This was something deeper, something raw. Judge Holloway sat forward, his hand instinctively gripping the edge of his bench. His eyes bounced between Charlotte's small, steady hand and the dog now growling at the defendant like he'd found a ghost. The judge slammed his gavel. 15-minute recess, he barked faster and louder than anyone expected. The courtroom jolted at the sudden command. Even the attorneys looked confused. The prosecutor, Elena Price, shot him a questioning glance, but Holloway didn't return it. His focus was locked on Charlotte and Zeus. As the room began to empty, Charlotte remained seated, one hand still gripping Zeus's leash. Her mother, Amelia Bennett, rushed to her side, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Charlotte didn't speak. She didn't need to. She reached down and buried her fingers in the thick fur along Zeus's neck, her face pale but calm. Outside in the hallway, Judge Holloway pulled aside the lead investigator, Detective Henry Caldwell. That wasn't just a dog reacting to nerves, the judge murmured. He knew something. You saw it. Caldwell nodded grimly. That growl, that focus, I'd bet everything he recognizes Ross. The judge exhaled, jaw tightening. Then we need to find out how. In the defendant's private room, Daniel Ross dropped the facade. His smirk faded. His jaw clenched. He stared at the wall for a long second, then muttered under his breath, "That damn dog." He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't expected her to speak without saying a word. Before the silence, before the courtroom, before the weight of fear stole her voice, Charlotte Bennett was the kind of child who could make a whole room smile. She spoke in endless streams of curiosity about ladybugs, clouds, and where stars go when the sun comes out. Her laughter was a daily melody in the Bennett home, especially when she danced barefoot in the backyard, spinning in her favorite pink dress. That April afternoon had started like any other. The sun was warm. The breeze smelled of blooming magnolias. Amelia Bennett stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup while glancing out the window. Charlotte twirled in the yard, pretending to be a fairy queen, her stuffed bunny perched in the grass nearby like a loyal courtier. The phone rang, her sister, calling from out of state. Amelia stepped away for just a few minutes. 4 minutes. When she returned, the front gate was open. Panic stabbed her gut. She dropped the phone. Her eyes searched the yard, heart pounding. At first, she didn't see anyone. Then her breath caught. Charlotte was still there. But she wasn't alone. A black van idled near the curb, its side door slightly ajar. Kneeling beside Charlotte was a man, average build, khaki jacket, sunglasses. He was smiling. Too warm, too rehearsed. "I have puppies in my van," he was saying, his voice smooth. "Special ones. They're shy. They need a little girl to take care of them. Would you like to see?" Charlotte didn't speak, didn't move. She just stared, as if caught in a trance. Amelia's scream sliced through the quiet like a blade. "Charlotte." The man's head snapped up. His smile vanished. For a split second, his mask dropped, his eyes turned cold. He grabbed Charlotte's wrist. But across the street, an elderly neighbor, Hazel Monroe, was out walking her terrier. She saw everything. Her voice, cracked with age but strong with fury, rang out. "Hey, get away from that child." The man hesitated. Just a second. It was enough. Charlotte yanked her arm free and bolted. Amelia caught her in mid-run, scooping her into her arms just as the van's engine roared to life. Tires screeched. The vehicle disappeared in a blur of black and burning rubber. Back inside, Charlotte didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She just buried her face into her mother's shoulder and trembled silently. The police arrived minutes later. Detective Henry Caldwell took over the scene. He'd worked abduction cases for over 20 years. He recognized the signs, the method, the timing. "Fits the pattern," he muttered. "Fourth case like this in 18 months. His partner, Agent Zoe Grant, knelt beside Charlotte. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "can you tell us what he looked like?" Charlotte didn't answer, didn't blink. Her fingers just clutched her mother's blouse. "She hasn't said a word," Amelia whispered. "Not since I picked her up." Agent Grant exchanged a glance with Caldwell. "Selective mutism," she murmured. "A trauma response." And just like that, Charlotte's voice was gone. The days after the incident passed like shadows over the Bennett household. The laughter that once filled their modest home had vanished. Charlotte no longer played with her stuffed bunny or danced in the backyard. She didn't speak. She didn't hum. She didn't even cry. She simply drifted through the house like a ghost in a little girl's body. Amelia and Lucas Bennett tried everything: bedtime stories, her favorite snacks, songs that once made her giggle. Nothing worked. At night, Charlotte tossed and turned, waking up in a cold sweat. She never screamed, only gasped, silent, broken gasps that tore at her mother's heart. One evening, as the kitchen clock ticked toward midnight, Amelia sat at the table with her husband, eyes hollow from exhaustion. "The therapist suggested a support animal," she said softly, staring at her tea without drinking. "A dog, one trained to help trauma patients." Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. "You really think it'll help?" "I don't know," Amelia whispered, "but I'd try anything. Anything that might reach her." That's how they found Zeus. It was Dr. Eleanor Gray, a renowned animal behaviorist, who introduced them to him. Her clinic sat on the edge of town, surrounded by trees and quiet. She specialized in rehabilitating retired service animals, pairing them with survivors both young and old. Zeus had once been a decorated K-9 officer with the city police force. He was known for his instincts, his loyalty, his bravery. But during a raid to rescue a kidnapped child, he'd been injured, slashed across his side while protecting an officer. Though he survived, the wound affected his mobility. The department, strapped for funding, retired him. He was scheduled for euthanasia until Dr. Gray intervened. "I believe he still has a purpose," she told the Bennetts. "Sometimes, the ones who are broken are the ones who understand best." When Charlotte first saw Zeus, she didn't react at all. She stood in the doorway of Dr. Gray's office, clinging to Amelia's leg, her green eyes barely peeking out. Zeus, lying on his orthopedic mat, didn't move. He simply watched her, ears forward, eyes calm. He didn't approach, didn't beg for attention. He just waited. Dr. Gray knelt beside Charlotte. "You don't have to talk," she said gently. "You don't even have to touch him. Zeus will wait. If you feel ready, you can hold out your hand." Silence. Then, slowly, inch by inch, Charlotte stepped forward, her tiny fingers stretched outward, trembling slightly. Still, Zeus remained still, waiting for permission. When her hand finally touched his fur, something shifted. Charlotte didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. Her fingers curled into the thick coat, holding him like he was the only solid thing in her world. Amelia gasped, covering her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a smile. But it was connection. Connection. And for the first time since that terrifying day, Charlotte had reached out. From the moment Charlotte touched Zeus, something began to shift slowly, gently, like spring light melting winter frost. She didn't speak, not at first, but her silence felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was thoughtful, intentional. Back home, Charlotte followed Zeus everywhere. She no longer clung to Amelia's side like a shadow. Instead, she trailed behind the German shepherd like a moon orbiting her son. She sat beside him for hours, running her small fingers along the scar on his flank. Sometimes she'd lie beside him on the rug, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, soothing, alive. Amelia and Lucas watched this transformation with cautious hope. For the first time in weeks, Charlotte no longer stared through them. She noticed things: when Zeus perked his ears at a sound outside, when he tilted his head at Amelia's voice, when he nudged her gently during mealtimes. She even started drawing again. Crayon pictures soon decorated the refrigerator. Each one told a silent story, a little girl and a big dog standing side by side. In some, shadowy figures loomed behind them, but the dog always stood between. always protecting. Then came the moment no one expected. One rainy afternoon, Charlotte sat on the living room floor while Dr. Gray visited for a follow-up session. Zeus was showing off a simple trick: sit, stay, paw. Charlotte watched him intently, her hands curled in her lap. When Zeus finished, his tail thumped once against the floor. He turned to Charlotte and stared as if waiting. "Good boy," she whispered. The words were so soft Amelia almost didn't hear them. Her heart skipped. She froze mid-step. "Charlotte?" The girl blinked. Her lips were parted in surprise, as if she hadn't meant to say anything, like the words had simply slipped out. Uninvited, yet undeniable. Dr. Gray smiled gently. "She wasn't talking to us," she said quietly. "She was talking to him." Amelia knelt beside her daughter, tears in her eyes. "Baby, it's okay. You can talk to him anytime you want." Charlotte didn't answer, but her hand reached for Zeus, burrowing into his thick fur. He licked her fingers once, then rested his head in her lap. Dr. Gray leaned into Amelia and whispered, "She trusts him. That's the first step." Amelia nodded. "Then we'll follow wherever that trust leads." From that day on, Charlotte began speaking in fragments, always to Zeus, always in whispers. But they were her words, words born of safety, of healing. She still couldn't talk about that day, and no one asked her to. But when the nightmares came, Zeus was there, his heartbeat like a lullaby. And little by little, the girl who had vanished began to return. Not with grand gestures or sudden breakthroughs, but with a whisper, and a wagging tail, and the kind of bond no trauma could ever break. The courtroom was packed. News had spread that Charlotte Bennett, the little girl who had vanished into silence after the attempted abduction, would take the stand. Journalists filled the benches, their cameras banned but their pens ready. The jury, already briefed and weary from long days of legal arguments, looked different today, more alert, more emotionally braced. Something about this witness had changed the atmosphere. Daniel Ross sat stiffly at the defense table. The calm smirk he'd worn earlier in the trial had faded into something harder, colder. He knew the girl hadn't spoken a full sentence since that day. But the dog had made him uneasy from the beginning. And today the dog was back. Charlotte entered holding the leash, Zeus at her side. She didn't cling to her mother this time. She walked, step by step, chin up, her eyes scanning no one and everyone all at once. Zeus matched her perfectly, his stride slow, measured, but alert. When they reached the witness stand, the bailiff opened the gate. Charlotte climbed into the seat. Zeus sat at her feet, never looking away from Ross. Judge Nathan Holloway studied them both. He'd already ruled that Zeus could remain in the courtroom as a support animal over the loud objections from Ross's attorney. The paperwork was solid. The psychologist's letter was detailed. But even so, Judge Holloway hadn't expected the weight of the moment to feel this heavy. The prosecutor, Elena Price, stood slowly, voice gentle. "Hi, Charlotte. You don't have to speak unless you want to, okay? If you'd rather nod or shake your head, that's perfectly fine. And if you want a break, just let us know." Charlotte didn't move. Her fingers curled tightly around Zeus's leash. Her gaze remained low, fixed on the polished wooden railing in front of her. Elena knelt slightly to meet her eye level. "Charlotte, do you remember the man who was in your yard that day?" Silence. Then slowly, deliberately, Charlotte raised her arm and pointed. Her hand, small but steady, leveled directly at Daniel Ross. A stunned hush fell over the room. A few people audibly gasped. Even Ross flinched, his jaw tightening. "Objection," shouted Michael Greer, his voice sharp. "The child was shown photographs of my client multiple times prior to the trial. Her identification is unreliable." "Overruled," Judge Holloway said, not looking away from Charlotte. Elena continued, "Charlotte, did that man say anything to you that day?" Charlotte didn't speak, but she moved. Her hand twitched just like it had in the earlier hearing. The same signal. Zeus's reaction was instant. His ears snapped forward, his body tensed. A growl rumbled from his chest, low, unshakable, and aimed like a loaded weapon at Ross. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it was a declaration. And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't just watching a child testify. They were watching a dog remember. The ripple effect from Zeus's growl was immediate. As the courtroom emptied for recess, Elena Price and her team huddled in a corner of the hallway, voices low but urgent. Something in that reaction, primal, instinctive, confirmed what many had begun to suspect. Daniel Ross wasn't just guilty of one attempt. He was a predator with a pattern. That same afternoon, lab results came back on the soil samples found in the back of Ross's van. The composition-specific pine debris, decayed moss, and limestone traces was unique to one area in the northern county. It pointed to a stretch of woodland so remote, it didn't even show up clearly on most GPS systems. Detective Henry Caldwell had a bad feeling the moment he saw the location. He didn't pick that spot by accident, he muttered. Let's move. The search team, including local deputies and federal agents, arrived at the site by early evening. The sky was graying, clouds dragging across the treetops like smoke. The cabin stood alone, partially hidden by dense woods and overgrown shrubs. Its windows were boarded. Dust clung to the porch, but faint footprints in the muddy ground said someone had been there recently. They brought Zeus. Charlotte stayed home, but the dog had become more than a comfort animal. He was now a lead. As they approached the cabin, Zeus's ears twitched, his body went rigid, his tail stiffened. Then the growl came low and almost mournful. There's something here, Caldwell said, drawing his weapon. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished. A cot, empty food cans, a rusted stove. But near the back wall, the wooden floor looked wrong. One board had been replaced recently. Its color was different, slightly warped. Caldwell knelt, tapping it, hollow. Pry it up, he ordered. The floor gave way to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Flashlights flicked on. The air turned damp and cold, heavy with mildew and something worse, something metallic, like rusted chains or dried blood. As they moved down into the basement, beams of light swept across concrete walls and then stopped. Children's shoes, a faded pink backpack, stuffed animals, an old juice box, and in the farthest corner, a girl. She was chained but alive, pale, thin. Her matted hair fell over her face, but as one of the officers stepped forward, she lifted her head. "Help," she rasped. Her voice was cracked and dry, but it was there. Caldwell rushed in, his heart thundering in his chest. "We've got a live one. Call it a no." Zeus whined, pawing at the edge of the staircase, his eyes locked on the girl. Her name was Emma Sullivan. She had been missing for 6 months, and she had just become the case's most unexpected survivor. The news of Emma Sullivan's rescue hit the courthouse like a lightning strike. For 6 months, her photo had haunted flyers, Facebook posts, and desperate news segments. And now she was alive, weak but alive, and she could talk. The courtroom was packed to capacity when court resumed the following day. Spectators filled every bench, their expressions a mix of anticipation and disbelief. Media vans lined the streets outside. This case, once murky and uncertain, now stood on the edge of clarity and justice. Daniel Ross looked different. Gone was the smug composure. His jaw was tight, his suit wrinkled. Sweat gleamed on his forehead. He hadn't slept, and it showed. As Judge Holloway entered and took his seat, the room stood. His eyes scanned the space with more weight than usual. He knew what was coming. Everyone did. Elena Price rose with a folder in hand. "Your Honor, we request to admit new evidence. Soil analysis linking the defendant's vehicle to the remote cabin, tire tread matches found outside the structure, and most importantly, the testimony of a living victim found at that very site." Gasps, audible, real. Ross's attorney, Michael Greer, sprang to his feet. "Objection. This is ambush evidence. My client was not given prior." "Overruled," Judge Holloway said firmly. "Proceed." Emma couldn't testify in person that day. Her body was recovering, but her video statement was played for the court. In it, her voice cracked, but her words were clear. "He told me to be quiet. He said no one would find me." Then she pointed to a photograph of Daniel Ross and nodded. The room fell into stunned silence. And then it happened again. Zeus, who had been resting quietly at Charlotte's feet, slowly lifted his head. His ears pricked forward. His body grew still tense. Then, just as he had before, he growled. Deep, low, directed. At Daniel Ross. The defendant visibly recoiled. His fingers gripped the table edge. His breathing grew shallow. For the first time, the mask cracked. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Ross," he said carefully, "have you had any prior interaction with this dog?" Ross didn't answer, but his hands began to shake. Then he leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something quickly, urgently. Greer turned pale. "Your Honor, my client would like to amend his plea." Murmurs rippled across the room like thunder rolling through a canyon. Judge Holloway sat forward. "Are you stating you wish to change your plea, Mr. Ross?" Ross looked down at the floor, defeated. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "Guilty." A collective gasp burst from the room, followed by stunned silence. Charlotte didn't react. She simply reached down and ran her hand through Zeus's fur. He had known all along. And now, so did the world. In the quiet days that followed the trial, Charlotte sat in the backyard once again this time, not spinning in fear, but simply sitting with her back against the warm trunk of an old tree. Zeus lay beside her, head resting gently on her lap, eyes closed in peace. The world hadn't fully healed. Neither had she. But something inside her had begun to return slowly but surely. She cupped his face with both hands, looked into those deep amber eyes, and whispered two simple words. "Thank you." Her parents watched from the porch, tears in their eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of relief. They had feared their daughter might never come back to them. But through one loyal, scarred companion, she had found the path home. Some say animals can't speak. But Zeus had spoken loudly, clearly, without a single word. And a courtroom had listened. What about you? Do you believe a dog can feel what humans can't? Can a bond like this truly change the course of justice, or even save a life? Let us know in the comments. Because sometimes the bravest voice comes from those who never speak at all.